Hey, DM Dongo here with another review from the DM's Guild. This time we're looking at Uncaged Anthology Volume 1 by the Uncaged authors, headed up by Ashley Warren. I'll have a link or something to kind of like say who all of the authors are, because there's quite a lot of them. Might have to actually be on both sides like that or something. Anyways, so Uncaged Anthology Volume 1 is currently on sale in the DM's Guild for $14.95 for the PDF, or $35.95 for the hardcover, or $44.95 if you want both. Uncaged Anthology Volume 1. What are you getting here? You're getting 26 adventures that range from Tier 1 to Tier 4. If you don't know what the tier system is, it's a way of breaking up the levels in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition to kind of say, well, these ones are the early stuffs, this is a little after that. Kind of like where the power spikes are in D&D 5th edition. So 5th level is a known power spikes, and that's where Tier 2 begins. If you want the specifics, I'll put up a guide over here just so everyone can see it. Now, Uncaged Anthology follows a very specific theming as well, and this all stems from a tweet Ashley Warren put out about a year ago. And I want to read you what the exact theming is for Uncaged Anthology in her own words. So, Uncaged is a collection of myth and folklore themed adventures written for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Each original adventure subverts tropes around a female mythological creature or monster, including hags, harpies, medusas, and much, much more. So, you know what you're going to get here. You're getting a subversion of tropes. Things like hags aren't the hags and medusas and harpies and sirens and all sphinxes and all of these kinds of classically female monsters and creatures who are generally vilified in their own stories. And at the same time, it's like, well, they have stories beyond that. So you're getting a subversion of those tropes, and you're getting a much more interesting, you're getting much more varied, you're getting different and unique perspectives here, which is a really great thing. All of the adventures are very short, running between 1 to 5 hours. So all of these are one-shots, and they actually don't have a whole lot of page space to them, as it were. I think the longest is about 11 pages total. So they're very easy to pick up and play and to run very, very quickly. So, I want to go into 4 specific adventures. So, let's start with the earliest. I'm going to pick 4 from the different tiers. So, 1 from Tier 1, 1 from Tier 2, 1 from Tier 3, and the only one from Tier 4. But Tier 4 adventures are very difficult to write, so I'm not surprised there's only one of those. So, let's get started with the Tier 1 adventure. The first adventure I want to look at is for a Tier 1 adventure called From the Forest They Fled by Alison Huang. And this is the beautiful art that comes along with it. And that's something that I want to kind of touch on right here, is that each of these adventures includes this really beautiful illustration to go along with it in one way or another. And in fact, the actual cover for Uncaged Anthology is really, really lovely. You're going to be getting a lot of really beautiful art. In fact, if you were to get this in a hardcover, you could just leave it open as an art book and in some place on your coffee table, and it wouldn't look that out of place. So, I want to talk about this specific adventure. What it is that you are tasked with going into a forest that seems to be, all of the animals seem to be fleeing for some reason. It's a level 1 to 3 adventure, so really great for a starting adventure, trying to figure out if you want it, how to get your feet as a DM, or if you have new players and they're trying to figure out if they want to play D&D. This is a really great kind of like starting base adventure for them. But you head into the woods and you find that there are some really odd things that are going on here. The animals are fleeing. It's incredibly quiet. There is this sense that something is happening that you're not aware of, that your party is not kind of clued in on. And when you finally get to the person, because this one's centered, each of the ones centers around a specific creature. This one centers around a creature. And like most of the adventures that require it, they all have content warnings. This one specifically is forest fires. So you head into the clearing, you battle your way through a small amount of defenders, and you find a dryad at the center of it. And I'm not going to spoil anything here, but the dryad is doing something that your players might not understand. Now, the obvious reaction is for some players, especially the murder hobo types, to immediately start shooting at her. But other players might and should use talking as a first reaction. And that's kind of a theme that I see in a lot of the adventures here. Combat is always the secondary option. It's never the one that you think of, this is the way this is meant to be solved, is through violence. It's like, well, no. Most of these adventures seem to center around the idea that violence is definitely the second option, is the one that you don't want to use. You want to be able to talk, to converse, and to reach some kind of agreement with every creature that you come across, or everything that you come across, potentially. Yes, there is a lot of combat here, but there's a lot of really interesting things around that. And depending on how your party handles this situation is to what rewards they end up with as a result. Do it well and do it peaceably, and maybe the rewards are better. Do it violently and slaying everything in sight, and, well, maybe everyone flees and runs and the forest burns down. Right, so for the Tier 2 adventure, I'm going to be looking at the Guardian of the Forest. And this adventure is at level 5 to 8 by the Awkward Bard. And it centers around a creature, one that almost everyone will be aware of or know of, the Medusa. So your adventuring party is tasked with going into the Castleland Woods, which has been slowly being turned into a swamp. And not only that, there have been kobold and ogre raids on the nearby settlements that have worried and concerned the local citizenry. So you can easily build some adventure hooks around, well, the event, like you're wandering through, there's a nearby village, and they've tasked you, please can you go in and deal with this? We don't know what's going on, but people are dying or people are being hurt and injured for it. And we think it has something to do with the swamp. As you head in, you come across a Medusa who's fighting off a number of kobolds, and she's handily defeating most of them. But she's still very injured and slowly losing health, and she can't keep it up eventually. Eventually, she's going to fall. And once the kobolds are dealt with in one way or another, especially because kobolds are a little afraid of a lot of things, your party showing up might be enough to just scare them off. At that point, the Medusa introduces herself as Petra, saying that she is the future guardian of the forest, but the current guardian is in danger from Murgis, a black dragon. You go into the specific the temple where the guardian is, and you go in to rescue them. Sorry, them, not him. Sorry. But there's a lot of things here that I really liked. I wanted to specifically point out, and there's some other things that this shows up in other areas. When you come across other creatures that are guarding the Temple of the Forest, they're doing things. They're not just standing around waiting to be killed by the adventuring party. They might be playing with a ball. They might be teasing each other. They might be playing keep away. They might be weeping in a corner because they lost their ball. All of these things happen, and it feels more organic. It feels more like the creatures are alive, and they behave the way they should. The end of the adventure comes across as you going up against Murgis the Usurper, the dragon. That's kind of obvious from the get-go. What happens as a result of that, though, I'm leaving blank here. But this is a really great little adventure, especially for Tier 2. It kind of guides you through it. The only thing that I will say is there aren't any maps here, and some of those would have been really helpful here, especially because of the nature of the temple and like navigating your way through it. But I also like that there are multiple conclusions based on what you do and how you fight. Right, so for my Tier 3 adventures, I'm looking at Ghastly Grins by Judy Black. And this adventure centers around the Dullahan. If you don't know what the Dullahan is, it's I think it's Irish or Celtic myth folklore around a headless woman who rides around on a horse. Now, there's a really great anime called Duara, which goes through that legend and kind of like talks about that specific legend. The main character is a Dullahan but who is missing her head, because they always have their head. So if you think about things like Sleepy Hollow, that's a Dullahan as well, although it's loosely based on it, and I think it's a male in that. Although the original tale might be female, it'll be kind of interesting to see what that is. Anyways, this adventure starts around you entering a village that is very strange. Everything is boarded up, everything is blocked up, you can't seem to get into most places, and when you finally go to an inn, all of the villagers go, hey, why aren't you wearing your neck guards? Why aren't you protecting? Are you you're silly, you're gonna get your head chopped off. And then you go from there, and you're tasked with finding out what this creature is and who summoned it more specifically, because they know it's a Fae creature, a creature of the Fae court. I think it's an Unseelie Fae, if I remember correctly, and they know it was summoned by somebody, but they don't know who. Recently, the village has gone through a bit of political upheaval. There is a new mayor, and they are trying their best to kind of keep everyone safe, up to the point where they're even willing to sacrifice themselves as they were the first one being attacked. So you have all of this nice little political intrigue going on. You have a lot of some really dangerous monsters, because the Dueling Hand is actually really, really powerful. It's capable of killing creatures in one hit. It was always rumored to wield a Vorpal blade, a decapitation blade, basically, something like, and it's specifically set out in a stat block that it can cut your head off in one strike. And the combat that it occurs here is very interesting, very dynamic in terms of the final battle. Is incredibly well done, not because of because of the win condition that is specifically set out in that combat. It's very different, very hard to kind of figure out. It's not figure out, but very not intuitive. I think the right word here is quirky, because of the very nature of what you're trying to do. Because if you understand what the problem is, the battle becomes very easy. If you don't understand what the problem is, the battle becomes very, very hard very quickly. Because your instincts would be to kill everything on sight, to try and deal with it that way, but that isn't necessarily is the right answer. And that's why this combat is very interesting, is because that's not the way you should go about it. The final one I'm going to be looking at is The Tale of Two Sphinxes by Jessica L. Washburn. This adventure is the highest tier it can possibly be. So these run from 17 to 20. The content warnings here are grief, post-traumatic stress disorder, and abuse. And this adventure centers around two sphinxes, basically. And they are... so most people know what a sphinx is. It's the body of a lion, the face of a man, or in this case, man and woman, because gynosphinxes are female and androsphinxes are male. I think andro, yeah. Anyways, and it centers around Byssamros, who is there's two sphinxes, Byssamros and Asmuzi. And Asmuzi is the gynosphinx. She is a black sphinx, really, really beautiful art for her near the end of the adventure. I really love this art. It's really, really well done. And I really love the art that's presented at the start. It's really interesting. But it centers around, this whole adventure centers around these two sphinxes and working your way through the 5 stages of grief. So shock, denial, bargaining, depression, and finally an acceptance. And if you do it correctly, there's no combat at all. If everything goes the way it's supposed to, if you understand the puzzles and the traps and the tricks and the various riddles, because sphinxes do love a good riddle, you will get through this and you will feel like you accomplished something, even if you never fought a single thing. Players being players, it is incredibly unlikely that that's what's going to occur. And there's some really interesting things here. I really like the puzzles that are presented here. They don't require a huge amount of thought, but they require a certain kind of thought, and they require you to kind of stop and take your time and talk with each other as well. There's a lot of points in the adventure where certain abilities are lessened and other abilities are strengthened, but not to everyone. So you end up with this interesting balance where one player has to, where characters have to ask other characters for help. And that's the thing, is like a lot of these ones, especially the chapter 3, the depression chapter, where you have this large puzzle in place. If the characters specifically don't ask for help, they might run into more trouble than they're worth. The more trouble than they can handle, as it were. And it's really, really interesting in terms of that kind of power structures, because this whole thing is all about moving through grief and how you handle it. And I think some players may realize that very quickly and others won't. It's really a really well put together adventure, and there's a lot of really interesting things that can happen, and there are some really interesting combat scenarios that could occur as a result of this, but it's generally not the focus here. Now let's go through what I liked about the Uncaged Anthology. I really like the theming. I love the idea of subverting expectations of players. I love the fact that when you go and look at something like this, you expect players, oftentimes, especially experienced players, will expect certain things. They will expect the Medusa to be evil. They will expect the Gyro Sphinx to be evil. They will expect the Dryad, the Siren, the Hag. They will expect them to be antagonists. That's not the case here. Almost never is that the case here. They are far more nuanced. Yes, they might be aggressive towards you. Yes, they might be trying to hurt you, but they're not your classic antagonists. They aren't the classic versions of themselves. They are a better version of themselves, a more realistic version of themselves, because they have wants, desires, and needs. They aren't just some hag to be slain simply because they exist, but more they want things. They desire things. They want to live and breathe in this world for whatever reason they might have, and that makes them more interesting. I also really, really love the art. Every single time that there is a new adventure, there's a new beautiful piece of art to go along with it. I stand by my statement earlier. I think you could leave this on your table as an art. It would probably do really well. I'll put links up to some of the art that's in this whole thing. A lot of this is custom art. Some of it is stuff that I've seen before. Specifically the one for Ghastly Grins is one of the official arts for the Sleepy Hollow story. So another thing I really liked, I liked the fact that there were content warnings on a lot of the adventures. And I think that's something that some GMs will appreciate, some GMs will bemoan, but I would rather have them than not. Because sometimes if I'm playing with random people, I would want to know this stuff. I would want to be able to put up on a board, these are the themes that I'm going to be running through. And more specifically, maybe if I look at something and go, well, that makes me as a GM uncomfortable, so I'm not going to do it. Or if it's something like, well, I'm going to play this in a live setting with a lot of people. I don't really want to be going through themes like these. I'd rather use these things instead and use the safety tools that are necessary, that I feel that would be useful in those situations. The other thing I really liked, I like the fact that there's so much variance in the kind of adventures that you get. There's a lot of different things like political intrigue, some very different ones around horror, some ones around more classical adventures, some dungeon crawls, so a lot of different things that are going on here. In fact, there's one adventure that I really liked that I didn't specifically look at, more because of the format it is, rather than the kind of adventure than anything else. Basically, what I wanted to say here is that I basically rolled dice to figure out which adventure I'd look at, because I like a lot of them and I couldn't decide. But the one I want to look at here is one where the adventure was split up into sections, and the amount of travel a player would have to do in order to complete, players would have to do to complete everything was quite a lot. So this is one of those adventures where you could drop it in early and say, well, this is a side quest for you to do as you go along, and introduce these characters slowly over the course of a campaign. And I really like that. I think that's kind of interesting as a way of structuring an adventure. I really did like the maps that were included. There's a lot of variance in them. Some of them are like they're very different from each other. They're very kind of like, there's some classic like Dice and Logos ones, or Dice and Logos styles with the cross hatching. There's some like very old style kind of just a basic like Manila like old style map, and there's some other ones that are far more detailed than that. The Temple of Ma'at, which is really, really well detailed, and there's some really lovely, just some generally lovely art. Right, on to what I didn't like about the Uncaged Anthology, and there's only a couple of things here, so I think, yeah, there's three things that I want to talk about here. Firstly, I want to go look at the structure of the adventures themselves and the non-consistency of them. But this is a problem that exists within all anthologies, and it's kind of one that I kind of mention every so often, just so that people are aware of it, and it kind of, it irks me a little bit, but it's not like a deal breaker. So, what am I talking about specifically? Well, for example, some adventures will include something called a dramatis personae, where you say, here are all the creatures, here are all the NPCs that you can have. And here's like a one line their basic motivations and potentially the page they first appear on. Some of the adventures have that, some don't. Some have a rewards section saying, here's the rewards for the entire adventure, including all the XP divided up depending on what you defeated and what you didn't. Here's all the treasure rewards for, here's, if you found this or this and kind of thing. Here's all of the rewards for the entire adventure. And some don't. And it's that inconsistency that is kind of a little jarring. Some include things like, here's some tactics for the monsters that they'll use, and the others won't, and they'll expect you to figure those things out. It would have been nice to kind of like standardize those kinds of things across all of the adventures and say, you need to include this, this, and this. If you're going to have a fight, include the tactics for it. If you're going to have rewards, here's where you put them, and here's the formatting we want to use. That kind of stuff makes a big difference in terms of making things feel consistent across multiple adventures. And I think if you were to create a bunch of people, a bunch of very talented authors and writers, and put them together and say, hey, what do we want to do to make this easy to run as possible? Those kinds of things you could reach to a very good consensus about. So maybe you don't have the rewards section at the end, but it would be nice to include things like the dramatis persona, depending on what you did as a discussion. The second thing I want to point out is that there aren't a whole lot of maps in this in terms of the total adventures, between the amount of adventures presented, the amount of advanced maps available, and I think some of them could really use it. The Guardian of the Forest is a specific one I pointed out, but there are a few others in here that I think really would benefit from extra maps. Handouts as well. There aren't a whole lot of those. That would be really nice. Things like when people give you missives, people give you items, or people like for the more unusual monsters and creatures, it would have been nice to have art for them. Now, but that's one of those things that's really difficult to kind of do, especially because art and maps and things like that, not everyone can do those things. And doing those kind of stuff can be very expensive as well. So it's one of those things I say, yes, do more art. I understand why at the same time. The final thing I want to point out is something that is more specific to the Uncaged Anthology itself. And that is because all of the adventures, or a lot of them, run on the impression that there's a subversion of a trope, a subversion of an idea of an expectation. So you expect, for instance, that the hag is going to be evil. In this case, they're not. I think if you were trying to run all of these back to back, or if you were trying to run a lot of them, I think players would begin to expect it. They would begin to expect that the hag's on their side, that the dual hand is not so evil, that the Medusa is actually their friend. And I think it would lose something for that. So I think you need to be very careful about how often you pepper these adventures through your campaigns. It's really good to use them. I really love them, but you can overdo it, I think. And that's the kind of the cautionary tale I'm going to point out here. Right, so my final thoughts and my ratings. So overall, I really like Uncaged Anthology. I think it does something that I think the hobby needed. I think it needed somebody to go in and say, hey, look, these tropes that exist, why don't you not do them? Why don't you try something different? Why don't you say that the Medusa is the good guy? Why don't you say that the sea hags, they have reasons that they want to be in this area? Why don't you say that, the harpies aren't so bad. They're just trying to survive. And I really like it for that. And I think that there's a lot here, and I think about 6 or 7 adventures for a DM to get up for $14.95 is a really great bargain as well. Because I think not everyone's going to like every single adventure. I think that's just something that's going to happen. Not every person is the same, but I think most DMs will find 6 or 7 adventures roughly that they really fall in love with, that they can either curtail to their specific campaigns, and they can adjust and move things around as they see fit, or they find that they find when they want to run one of these run shots for like a convention or something like that. I could see you doing that very easily. The one thing I will say is that I would have loved to see more maps. I would have loved to see more handouts. Those just general kinds of polished things I really want to see. But overall, the entire content, if I was reviewing each individual adventure, my rating would change very depending on which adventure I was reviewing. But overall, as a whole thing, I think this deserves 4.5 stars out of 5. It's not perfect. There are some inconsistencies across the adventures that mean that I can't give it the full 5 stars, but I think on a whole, it's really well done. So, this has been my review of Uncaged Anthology. Thank you. Please do remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you do decide to pick up Uncaged Anthology, please use my affiliate code down below, either the hardcover, the PDF, or both. So currently they're on sale for $14.95, $35.95, and $44.95 respectively. So PDF, hardcover, and both. So do pick them up. They're currently on. They're really great value. The hardcover looks gorgeous. I don't have one myself. I need to get one. I'm hoping to be able to get that one soon. And peace out.